my husband, his mother, his father, his brother. All four of them knew. They knew for 11 months before I found the first email, and they said nothing. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. Because everything that happened after every quiet decision I made, every document I printed at the office, every morning I smiled across the breakfast table and asked my husband how he slept needs to be understood in that context. They all knew. And they chose him. Not me. Him. And her. Her name was Diane. She was the managing partner at the Chicago architecture firm where my husband had worked for 6 years. I was a financial compliance director at a logistics company 2 blocks north on Michigan Avenue. We had a house in Lincoln Park, a rescue dog named Walter, and a marriage I thought was solid enough to build the rest of my life on. I was 38 years old. I had worked since I was 19. I had never once asked anyone for anything I hadn't earned. I found the first email on a Thursday in October. My husband had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, something he never did, which is why it caught my eye. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I was pouring coffee and happened to glance at the screen and saw a name I recognized from the company holiday party the year before, where she had shaken my hand with both of hers and told me I must be so proud of him. The email was short. Just 4 lines. But those 4 lines told me everything I needed to know about the last 2 years of my marriage. I didn't cry. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there in my kitchen with my coffee going cold and a very quiet, very deliberate thought forming somewhere behind my sternum. I thought, you are not going to let this destroy you. You are going to be smarter than all of them. I closed the laptop exactly as I had found it. I finished my coffee. I drove to work. What I didn't do, what I refused to do, was confront anyone before I was ready. I had worked in financial compliance for 15 years. I understood paper trails. I understood that the person who loses their composure first almost always loses everything else second. And I had a feeling, even then, that there was more to this than 2 people who had made a mistake. I started paying attention differently after that Thursday. Not obviously. Not in a way anyone would notice. I started listening to the rhythm of things: who called when, which plans got cancelled at the last minute, why my husband had attended 3 professional development dinners in 1 month when he had never attended a single one in the 6 years before. 2 weeks after I found the email, I was at my mother-in-law's house for Sunday dinner. She makes a point of hosting every other week. She has a large house in Evanston, the kind that announces its own importance the moment you pull into the driveway, and she moves through it with the particular authority of a woman who has never been seriously inconvenienced. She is meticulous, strategic, and not nearly as subtle as she believes herself to be. That Sunday, she hugged me at the door for slightly too long. She asked about my work with slightly too much interest. She topped off my wine at dinner without being asked. Twice. None of these things would have meant anything 6 months earlier. But I was paying attention differently now. After dinner, while my husband was helping his father look at something in the garage, I was sitting at the kitchen island with my mother-in-law, and she said something that locked into place like a key turning. She said, "You know, I've been thinking. You work so hard. You and my son both work so hard. Sometimes I worry that 2 people with demanding careers can grow apart without even meaning to. It's no one's fault. It's just life." She was looking at her wine glass when she said it. I said, "That's a thoughtful thing to notice." She looked up at me and smiled, and I smiled back, and I understood exactly what she was doing. She was pre-softening me. She was laying the groundwork for something. She had known for long enough that she was already preparing her justification. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind working very fast. I have a colleague at work, someone I trust completely, one of the few people I trusted with what I was beginning to understand. She helped me think through what I was looking for and how to find it without tipping anyone off. Over the following 6 weeks, I built a picture so complete it almost impressed me. My husband had not simply fallen into an affair with his managing partner. The arrangement had been deliberate and, for the people around him, financially convenient. His brother worked at a small engineering consultancy that had received 3 substantial referrals from the firm where Diane was managing partner, referrals that had come in during the 11 months my mother-in-law had known what was happening. His father had a commercial real estate project that had stalled for 2 years until Diane's firm had signed on as the design consultants, a contract worth enough that it had saved the project from collapse. His mother, meticulous, strategic, not nearly as subtle as she believed, had accepted a sizable consulting fee from Diane's personal business account for services I could find no evidence she had ever performed. This was not a family that had looked the other way out of loyalty to a son and a brother. This was a family that had looked the other way and then extended their hands. I thought about the email in October. I thought about the dinner in Evanston and the wine being poured without being asked. I thought about a marriage I had spent 8 years building and a family I had spent 8 years believing in. I thought about my mother-in-law's hands, always so perfectly manicured, folded neatly on the kitchen island while she told me that growing apart was just life. I thought, no. My mother-in-law had been planning a party for my 39th birthday since September. She had mentioned it at least 4 times, each time with slightly more detail: the venue, the guest list, the caterer she had found in Wicker Park. She seemed genuinely excited about it in a way that should have been touching and instead, now, made a cold and clarifying kind of sense. She needed the party to happen. She needed me in a room surrounded by people she had curated, at a moment of her choosing, where she could control the narrative. I let her plan it. I want to be honest about how that felt. There were nights, not many, but a few, when I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and didn't go inside right away. There were moments when the thing I was carrying felt heavier than I thought I could hold. I had loved my husband in the way you love someone you have chosen over and over again for 8 years. I had loved his family in the way you love people you thought had chosen you back. But I did not fall apart. I did not confront him in the kitchen. I did not call his mother and tell her what I knew. I drove home, I walked Walter, I cooked dinner, I asked how his day was, and I waited. I filed 2 things very quietly in the weeks before the party. The first was with my attorney. The second was with the Compliance Office of the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation, regarding the consulting fee paid to a person with no documented professional qualifications for services with no documented deliverables. I did not file the second one for revenge. I filed it because it was the correct thing to do with the evidence I had, and because I had spent 15 years in financial compliance and could not unknow what I knew. The party was on a Saturday evening in late January, at a private event space in the West Loop. My mother-in-law had outdone herself. There were flowers everywhere, long white tablecloths, a bartender who knew my favorite wine without being asked. About 40 people. His parents' friends, his brother and sister-in-law, a few couples we had known together for years. And Diane. She was standing near the bar when I arrived, wearing a dress the color of deep water, talking to my father-in-law with the ease of someone who had been in this family's orbit for a long time. My husband was beside her. He looked up when I walked in, and something moved across his face that I cannot fully describe: relief, maybe, or the particular guilt of a person who has convinced themselves the thing they are doing is survivable. I smiled at him. I crossed the room. I kissed him on the cheek. Diane shook my hand. She told me happy birthday. She told me I looked wonderful. I thanked her. My mother-in-law materialized beside me within minutes, one hand on my elbow, steering me gently toward a corner near the windows. My husband followed. His father and brother appeared. I noticed, at the periphery of my vision, that Diane was drifting closer. My mother-in-law spoke first. She had clearly rehearsed this. She said that she loved me, that she had always loved me, that what she was about to say came from a place of care for everyone involved. She said that life was long and complicated and that the people we loved sometimes found connection in unexpected places. She said that she hoped I was the kind of woman who understood that love was not always a simple or a linear thing. My husband did not speak. He was looking at the floor. My father-in-law put his hand on my shoulder and said that they hoped we could all move through this together, as a family, and that being a family meant being willing to adapt to things we hadn't expected. My mother-in-law looked at me with her careful eyes and said, "We need you to be generous here. We need you to think about what matters." I looked at her for a moment. I looked at my husband. I looked at Diane, who was standing close enough now that there was no longer any pretense about what this gathering was. Then I opened my bag and I took out 2 envelopes. The first envelope I handed to my husband. It contained, among other documents, a copy of every email I had found, a summary of the timeline I had reconstructed, and a letter from my attorney advising him that divorce proceedings had been initiated the previous Wednesday. The second envelope I handed to my mother-in-law. It contained a copy of the bank transfer records showing the consulting fee paid to her from Diane's personal account, along with a note informing her that a copy of those same records had been submitted to the relevant regulatory office 14 days prior. I put my bag back on my shoulder. My husband opened his envelope first. He went through the first 2 pages and then he stopped. He looked up at me and his face had changed completely. The careful, composed face I had been looking at all evening was gone, and what was underneath it was something much younger and much more frightened. He said my name. I said, "I hope the rest of the party is nice. I really do like the flowers." My mother-in-law had not opened her envelope yet. She was holding it with both hands, her perfectly manicured fingers pressing into the paper, and she was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was the look of someone who has just realized they badly miscalculated who they were dealing with. I shook Diane's hand again on my way out. I told her good luck with the projects her firm still had pending with the city. I said it pleasantly, because I meant it pleasantly, and because I wanted her to have a moment to think about what I might or might not know about those projects before she went home that night. Walter was waiting at the door when I got home. I took him for a long walk. It was cold and very clear, the kind of January night in Chicago when the city goes quiet early and you can hear your own footsteps on the sidewalk. I walked for almost an hour and I did not cry, not then. That came later, in smaller installments, over weeks that were quieter and harder in ways I hadn't anticipated. But that night I just walked and let the cold air in and thought about what comes next. What came next, for the record, was this. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. I kept the house in Lincoln Park. My husband moved in with his parents temporarily and then, as far as I know, moved into Diane's apartment in River North. I did not track this closely. My mother-in-law's consulting fee situation resulted in a formal investigation that, my attorney informed me, concluded with a significant financial penalty and a requirement to repay the full amount with interest. She also lost a position on the board of a local nonprofit she had held for 9 years, which I imagine hurt more than the money. My brother-in-law's firm lost the referral pipeline from Diane's office within 3 months of the divorce filing, as such arrangements tend to collapse when the person brokering them is no longer in a position to broker anything. The last I heard, the consultancy was restructuring. My father-in-law's commercial real estate project remained under contract with Diane's firm. Since that was a legitimate business arrangement regardless of how it was initially facilitated, and I had never wanted to harm people I hadn't harmed first. I want to be precise about that, because I think people sometimes expect a story like this to end with everything burning. It didn't. What I wanted was not to burn anything down. What I wanted was to know the full shape of what had been done to me, and then to respond to it accurately and completely. That's different from revenge. Revenge is emotional. What I did was closer to correction. The Saturday after the party, my mother-in-law called me. I let it go to voicemail. In the message, she said that she hoped we could talk, that the family loved me, that she wished I had come to her first instead of going to attorneys and regulators. She said, with a sincerity that I believe was entirely genuine in its own way, that she had only ever wanted what was best for everyone. I did not call her back. What I thought about, on the Sunday after I listened to that voicemail, was the dinner in Evanston in October. My wine being poured without asking. Sometimes people grow apart. It's no one's fault. I thought about how carefully she had constructed that sentence and how clearly it had communicated, to anyone paying attention, that she had been sitting with this information long enough to develop a philosophy around it. Not a wife's distress. A philosophy. I thought about 11 months. I thought about what it means to decide that the woman married to your son is less important than the woman paying for your husband's building project. Then I put my phone in a drawer and took Walter to the dog park and let him run until he was tired, and we walked home in the cold and I made dinner for one, which was something I was getting better at every week, and I sat down at my kitchen table in my own house and ate it. Sometime around February, a few weeks after the divorce was finalized, I ran into a woman I barely knew at a work event, someone who had been at the birthday party, a friend of my mother-in-law's. She stopped me near the coat check and said, with genuine curiosity and no apparent awareness of how the question landed, "How are you doing with all of it? I mean, it must be so hard." I told her I was doing well. She said, "I always thought you two were so solid." We all did. I guess you just never really know, do you? I thought about everything I had known. I thought about the emails, the bank records, the timeline, the envelopes, the 11 months. I thought about my husband's face when he opened the first page and the controlled collapse of everything my mother-in-law had arranged. I said, "No. I suppose you don't." I picked up my coat and I thanked her for asking and I went back inside. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because I think it is the most important thing, and it is the thing I find myself thinking about more than any of the dramatic moments, more than the party, more than the envelopes, more than my husband saying my name in that empty, frightened way. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary, unremarkable, just work, and I realized that I had not thought about any of it for almost 6 hours. Not about my husband. Not about Diane. Not about my mother-in-law's voice on the voicemail telling me she had only wanted what was best for everyone. I had just worked, done my job, talked to my colleagues, eaten lunch, 6 hours of my life belonging entirely to me. I sat with that for a moment. Then I went back to what I was doing. That is what I want you to take from this. If you take anything, not the envelopes, not the paperwork, not the moment in the West Loop when my mother-in-law's face changed. Take the Tuesday afternoon. Take the 6 hours. Take the slow, unannounced return of a life that was mine. Nobody handed it to me. I built it back the same way I built the first one, carefully, without asking permission, one day at a time,